では、早速ですけども、キーノートに、次のキーノートですね、進めさせていただきたいと思います。ですかね。はい。では、クリスさんをお呼びしたいと思います。クリス、up to the stage, please.
So, my name is Aniszczyk. I'm going to be talking to you today about a little bit where the cloud-native landscape is going and kind of what we have planned for the future as an organization. A little agenda. I'm going to talk a little about a little introduction of what CNCF is and what cloud-native is. I'm going to do a little history of how we got here, and then more importantly, kind of talk about some future directions that the foundation and community is going towards. And then I will open it up, hopefully, if there's any questions towards the end if we have time. So a little bit of background on myself. I currently serve as CTO and CEO of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation and also run developer relations for the Linux Foundation. I've been involved in open source for almost 20 years now, hacking on Gentoo, Fedora, worked on Eclipse a long time ago. I've been involved with the Open Container Initiative, which helps standardize containers, but kind of had a storied career at a variety of companies hacking on open source, and eventually ended up starting the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So, if you kind of look the last 3 years, it's been a little bit crazy for me. I recently did the math, and I've traveled about 900,000 air miles in the last 3 years, which is a little bit brutal. But if you kind of look at the history, if you go back 3 years ago, Kubernetes was very much in its infancies compared to other solutions. We also had the quote-unquote container wars going on with Rocket and Docker and all that fun stuff. That's all gone now. We're all happy and working together, and you kind of see Kubernetes has kind of overtaken and really become the default orchestrator out there for containers, and is enjoying kind of its place there, where now the industry could get together and kind of build on this platform that's become a de facto standard. So those are the crazy last 3 years for me. Actually, this month in 3 days, we'll be celebrating 3 years since CNCF was really founded. So a lot of people have kind of asked, you are the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, but what exactly is Cloud Native Computing? So within our technical community, we've actually debated this topic for a while and decided to actually come up with a more kind of strict definition of what cloud native is. I'm not going to read this full thing, but essentially, I'll read the first couple sentences here. Is that cloud native technologies empower organizations to build and run scalable applications in modern dynamic environments such as public, private, and hybrid clouds. Containers, service meshes, microservices, immutable infra, declared APIs all exemplify this approach. So we go a little bit more in detail here, but I'm happy to say that there is actually a definition now if someone asks you what exactly is cloud native computing. Why are orgs actually moving towards cloud native technology? What is the uptick? Why has Kubernetes become so popular in the last few years? Well, the first kind of aspect is more and more organizations are looking to run infrastructure or use a cloud. They're becoming more software companies, and honestly, as you build out your infrastructure, you're looking to potentially containerize your applications for efficiency purposes and so on. So really, kind of the first reason most people are moving are to improve resource efficiency. Other reasons are there's a lot more modern CI/CD tools and other tools that you could use that actually improve developer efficiency, in my opinion. And then one of the original tenets and purposes of cloud native technologies was always to kind of enable the primitives to enable multi-cloud for you to potentially switch and use other clouds with not too much pain. So that's always kind of a long-term goal that we're shooting for as an organization. So this is kind of your rudimentary reasons of why organizations are moving towards cloud native. So CNCF, what are we? We were a not-for-profit that was founded in December 2015. We're part of the Linux Foundation, which many people don't realize is actually a federation of foundations, so things like the Node.js Foundation, let'sencrypt.org with all the free SSL certificates. These are all part of the Linux Foundation family of foundations. We have about 30 projects in CNCF now, which is quite amazing since we just started with one with Kubernetes in the early days. We have a variety of members. I'm not going to go dive into all our members, but the important thing to really note about CNCF is we have different levels of project maturity. So I don't know if people are familiar with kind of this classic business book out there called Crossing the Chasm. There's essentially analogies of different aspects of how products get built and how they kind of evolve. And for CNCF, we have 3 graduating projects: Prometheus, Kubernetes, and Envoy. And these are projects that are really meant for wide adoption and can be trusted by everyone. You can bet your business on it, essentially. And then we have incubating projects, which are a little bit more earlier stage, and then a concept of sandbox projects, which are meant for experimentation. You may not want to bet your business on it, but you're willing to experiment. So as a foundation, we try really hard to move our projects through kind of this life cycle. We don't expect all projects to reach the graduation stage, but we do our best to kind of get there. So yeah, I'm not going to talk about our membership. We have lots of members. We've got a good variety of Japanese companies there. But the really important thing here to note on the membership is we have essentially the majority of the worldwide top cloud providers. So we're talking Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Alibaba, Oracle, IBM, and so on are all members of the organization. There is no other open source foundation that has all these different competing large hyperscale cloud providers working together under the same roof. One of the most important things that CNCF does for Kubernetes and the cloud native community is to run a conformance program. So we have this notion of certified Kubernetes. This ensures that if you use a Kubernetes managed offering from Google or Amazon or Microsoft or others, or distribution from a company like Rancher, that you can be ensured that there won't be any breakage if you decide to move to another version of Kubernetes, or another provider of Kubernetes. So we currently have about 78 certified Kubernetes offerings. These are managed cloud offerings and also what we call distributions. So things like Rancher we would kind of consider a distribution, but these are all run the same kind of certified Kubernetes conformance test to ensure that there is kind of no breakage between things, so you can easily move your system to another one. So as an organization, we also produce educational materials. So a lot of people come to CNCF and say, I would love my organization to become cloud native. And we're like, well, what are your end goals? What do you really want to do? And a lot of times it's, hey, I want to ship code faster. I want better resource efficiency. So we put together this diagram that basically goes through kind of a journey of how your organization can become cloud native, from containerizing your application to using service meshes and so on. This is not meant to be the only way for your organization to become cloud native, but this is kind of a good example you could kind of use, and it also showcases CNCF projects that will be useful to you on that journey. So you could get access to this map on a website called l.cncf.io. So a little bit of evolving the cloud native CNCF. I've showed this diagram quite a bit in my presentations, but the whole idea here is historically when people develop software, we generally used, if you develop software back in the late 90s or early 2000s, it was very common to maybe buy some Spark boxes from Sun, or maybe some mainframes from IBM and so on. And so you basically had non-virtualized hardware running applications on a box. Over time, that eventually evolved where VMware came up with the notion of a virtual machine. So now you could fit multiple OSs or multiple VMs on the same machine, so you use more hardware. Fantastic. AWS eventually stumbled on kind of managed service with EC2 model infrastructure as service in 2006. The passes came with Heroku in 2009. Eventually we had open source versions of these things with OpenStack and Cloud Foundry. And eventually in 2013, Docker really popularized the notion of building containers and sharing containers amongst everyone. And then in 2015, CNCF came around along with Kubernetes to really popularize the notion of cloud native computing and build a neutral place where all these organizations could get together and collaborate on different open source projects to enable cloud native. So that's kind of the little history. But 2015, it's been about 3-4 years now, and so what's kind of next for us? So I'll skip the landscape. So what's really next for CNCF, cloud native, and so on? So really the most important mission that we have as an organization is, we really want to support our existing projects and ensure that they're successful and widely accessible for everyone to use. And we also want to fill some gaps that we have. So in the cloud native landscape that this crazy diagram, there are some missing pieces here that we haven't filled as an organization. So in the future, we're kind of looking to fill some gaps and having more projects fill these gaps in that diagram. So that's kind of the core what we're going to do the next few years, but there's specific technology directions that we're looking to kind of push people towards. So if you remember when Linux started, kind of Linus had this wonderful quote of like, yeah, I'm just doing a free operating system, just a hobby, won't be big and professional. Well, we learned that Linux eventually became, unfortunately, very large, big, and professional. And what happened is it originally kind of targeted as a hobby operating system and kind of learned from it, but eventually Linux came to almost dominate every market it entered. So, initially kind of very focused on the hobby operating system, eventually started to take over the server market. So most websites you go to now are running Linux on the back end to serve, websites. The supercomputer market, almost the majority of if you look at kind of the top HPC supercomputers of the world, the top 10 are running Linux now, which is quite amazing. If you look at Android is essentially Linux, so it's kind of taken over the smartphone market. I think what you'll see with Kubernetes is Kubernetes was very much originally designed to kind of scale workloads in your data center or multiple data centers. But what's happening now is people are seeing the use of Kubernetes into other domains essentially. And so what I mean by this is, for example, edge computing is becoming a thing. There's a lot of kind of folks that are building IoT devices, and what we're seeing is, if you're using Kubernetes essentially to manage, fleets of machines and containers running across a variety of data centers, it would be great if you had a very similar control plane to also manage workloads, on the edge, depending what that means for you, or even devices. So the goal here is to have a single control plane. So people have been doing a lot of interesting work to kind of enable this. So, there's kind of this funny blog. I don't know if, I don't think Chick-Fil-A is in Japan, but Chick-Fil-A is kind of a fast food restaurant in the US. They serve like chicken sandwiches. They're chicken themed. So it's like McDonald's or Burger King, but chicken. And so what they've done is they kind of have a joke where they are experimenting by having a Kubernetes cluster in every restaurant, and they got about like 2,000 of them. So they kind of have this little joke that they call Cloudfillet, that like they're like, oh yeah, Google or Amazon only have a handful or so of regions, but we got 2,000 of them. So the restaurant has a larger scale impact than the hyperscale clouds. But this blog that kind of link kind of shows that organizations out there are starting to push Kubernetes in ways that it was not intended to, but they will, just like Linux, improve it, contribute changes and make sure that Kubernetes can kind of fit those cases. So that's just one example. Kubernetes has a new IoT Edge working group that was spun up recently. They have a great kind of white paper talking about their goals, but essentially, the goal is Kubernetes was not really designed initially to work with the edge and IoT. And so what's happening is a lot of folks from different companies, like Google, Huawei, Bosch, Red Hat, are getting together to figure out how to extend and improve Kubernetes to kind of fit these use cases. So this is an open working group available for all to kind of participate in. Other folks are starting to build projects where, if you kind of look at some of the IoT environments or edge environments, sometimes they use binary protocols to communicate with kind of the different devices out there. And so Kubernetes was not intended to, work with that, right? Kubernetes generally, is a simple kind of HTTP request, but if you want to support other crazy binary protocols like MQTT or something else, you're going to have to do some work. So there's projects out there kind of exploring this concept. So the other crazy thing that's happening is, Kubernetes initially was definitely not intended to work for serverless-based workloads. So one thing we've done in CNCF is we've spun up a serverless working group that we're working together with our peers in the community to help define, what does serverless actually mean? How can you use Kubernetes to run serverless-based workloads? Which projects are out there? So just like I showed you that landscape earlier, we actually have something called the serverless landscape, which is available via s.cncf.io. So there's kind of a lot of work that's happening in CNCF around improving and extending Kubernetes so it works in a serverless context. Another crazy thing that's happening is this concept of kind of nodeless. So Kubernetes definitely has this notion of a kubelet, where you have to be tying to some underlying node that you're working with. Well, there is a project out there that today, you are the first to know about it because it's going to be announced as a official CNCF project that's entering the sandbox called Virtual Cubelets. So Virtual Cubelet is a kind of an interesting approach/hack, depending on how you look at it, that basically essentially proxies a kubelet that basically can be backed by anything. It can be backed by a cloud provider's Kubernetes service or a cloud provider's set of GPUs or anything. So essentially it proxies the Kubernetes API and allows you to call basically anything else. So there's a bunch of different people out there that have built providers to Azure's GPUs, Alibaba's service and so on, or Amazon's Fargate and so on. So this is a new project that's kind of entering CNCF, and I think you'll see this whole notion of a nodeless Kubernetes as a ripe place for experimentation the next couple of years. So the other thing that's happening is, I don't know how many people are familiar with the telco industry, but there's a big set of transformations that are happening that Kubernetes is being involved in. So, I'll cut through this quickly, but like telcos a long time ago, you actually had like physical boxes and routers, right? Telcos eventually wised up. They eventually started to create virtualized versions of these, right? Like VMs that encompassed like a physical router, right? And they called these things virtual network functions. What's happening now is, just like people are moving off of VMs to containers, telcos are starting to containerize their existing workloads, and what we're calling cloud native network functions, or CNFs for short, are becoming a thing. And so basically network architecture for telcos is going to be the same as it was before, but essentially running containerized and cloud native based workloads. And if you kind of look at this rough diagram, is in the future we expect Kubernetes to kind of be the substrate that manages all telco-based workloads, whether they're VNF-based or container-based in the future. There's a lot of projects out there that are oddly trying to run VMs on the Kubernetes called Kubevert and Vertlet, but the attraction of having a single control plane is extremely important for folks. So, to kind of wrap things up, we are a young community. We're 3 years old, which is kind of very young from an open source foundation and even open source project perspective. There's many avenues to contribute to CNCF. We have a landscape that I showed today that if you have projects that are missing there that need to be there, please contribute via pull requests. We have a contributors guide, so if you're looking to contribute to a specific CNCF project, we all have them outlined there. There's the IoT Edge working group, especially if you're interested in that. And if you're into cloud native networking functions, we have a Slack and GitHub page for that. So other kind of small things to mention is we have exams and online material for you to learn more about Kubernetes. We have certified exams if you're interested in becoming like a certified Kubernetes developer or admin. In Japan specifically, we have one organization, Creation Online, that provides training services and support in this. So if you're interested, they have kind of localized versions of these exams. Big things to mention, next week we have our huge Kubernetes conference in Seattle in December, which is sold out, which I apologize if you're unable to get for a ticket, but next year we'll have 3 major Kubernetes conferences in Barcelona, Shanghai, and San Diego. One thing that is not mentioned here is we plan on doing a Kubernetes Day for the first time in Japan next year, so we have not committed to a date, but look out for the news that we will do a one-day Kubernetes Day conference in Tokyo, most likely next year. So thing about conferences is our community has grown a lot. We're sold out already. We have 8,000 people attending our Kubernetes conference next year, so please get your tickets earlier because I had to deal with a lot of angry emails where people can get tickets. So please purchase tickets early, and they're cheaper if you get them earlier. So other than that, thank you again. We're so happy to sponsor this event. It's great to kind of see the container community and cloud native community growing in Japan. If you're an end user, organization that is interested to learn from your peers, we would love to have you join CNCF. There's a lot of information there on our website if you're looking to join. But other than that, thank you for your time, and hopefully you have a great Container Days. So thank you very much.